If I could somehow get paid every time someone said that they had nothing interesting to say, I would be a millionaire.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us. So today I'm talking to Justin Lamb. He's going to be on episode 46. And Justin, I'm so excited to talk to you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here. I'm curious to see where the conversation goes after listening to some of your episodes, and you know, I'm a big fan of stories in general as part of my life. So
yeah, we tend to go off on tangents. I tend to go off on tangents.
Stories are built on tangents.
That's right. Yes, really. So I was looking at your Podmatch profile page and looking at some of I tried to go to your website, but there was nothing there yet.
No. Oh, I know why that is. I just switched over to WordPress.
Yes. And you have to, you have to design it.
Yeah. One of my profiles on social media says justinlambmusic.com updated annually, because I do not do as much on there as I should.
Yes. Well, I was poking around and I was noticing that you have a podcast.
True.
And it's called Friend Request.
Yeah.
And then also you're becoming a therapist, you write songs and books, and we have so many things we can talk about. So where do you want to start?
Well, I definitely run the gambit of creativity in as far as my artistic endeavors. And you mentioned the writing and songwriting and playing music. And, you know, across from me right now, I'm looking at 2 guitars and a bass and a PA system. And
cool.
Before we started recording, I think we're talking about how many microphones I've had work with over the years. I just find it's such a great outlet to express yourself, and also to kind of meditate and find peace in music and drawing. And I've recently really gotten into writing a lot more, purely through the ability to like validate myself as like being like, it's okay that I write. Like, it's okay that, like, if I want to call myself a writer, like, that's okay.
Yes. Yes.
I dealt a lot with imposter syndrome and all of the above categories that we've talked about. So it's important that you kind of validate yourself and allow yourself to do whatever you're interested in. And that's the freedom I've given myself over the pandemic. And it's just frustrating. It took me, 3 decades to get to that point.
Oh, well, it took me a lot longer. But then I'm a bit older than you. And, I think generations learn from the previous generation. So I'm hoping my students have learned something from me and from my generation and from their parents' generation.
Yeah.
And are a little faster to find what they're about in the world.
I think about that and I wonder where the tipping point is, like at what point do we stop evolving and kind of start devolving, so to speak.
No, don't go there.
Well, it's just funny, like every generation expresses more tolerance, and seems seemingly a more open-minded, and it's hard, I feel like, to see that in this country a lot of times, because the people in power are not necessarily the populist generation. So I just wonder, how open can we get before we have to start closing off a little bit. Just a theoretical question for 200 years from now.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean about that. Yeah. Well, and it does, if you look at history, it does kind of go in waves like that.
Yeah.
Like you get to an open society and then something happens and they start to close down.
Yeah. Well, you can measure it right by like a woman's hemline, right? The ankles, calves, knees, thighs, and then at what point does the hemline start getting lower again? It's just a funny thing to think about when you think about current generations and future generations, and I'm sure through the eyes of someone that is just shaping those minds, you probably have an interesting point of view on that as well, seeing it in real time. And that's a strange thing that I'm doing right now is, as you mentioned, I'm becoming a therapist, and that, and as you know, involves a lot of school. So I'm back in school right now and starting my master's program, and so I'm in some classes with people that I could literally be their parents, or their parent. And so watching them from an observational standpoint and seeing that is very interesting. And it also reinforces that, like, my preferred clientele is like 25 to 45. I don't want to necessarily be with people that are still experiencing their trauma, more people that are ready to start dealing with it.
Yeah.
God bless teachers in high school and middle school.
Yeah, I used to teach high school. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I did 1 year of middle school and it practically killed me. I said never again. But it was my entrance into the school district, because I lost my job at a different school district. I couldn't teach theater anymore. I had to teach English. And so, but yeah, there came a time when it was like, even high school, I just can't take the drama anymore. And I do teach high school students sometimes, because we have the crossover thing with dual enrollment where they can get credit, college credit and high school credit at the same time, but not very often. And most of the time they fit in with the older students.
Yeah, they're kind of cherry picked in that way, I feel like, the potentially dramatic, immature teenagers that we were mentioning earlier, I don't think are the same ones that are seeking out college credit when they're still in high school.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true.
Still seeing, I think it's funny to think about what a college age kid is now. I mean, I'm typically like oldest in my class now that I'm at university, but I did community college for years. I have 3 associate's degrees. And I was rarely, if ever, the oldest person in class. The age range for those classes, are anywhere from 18 to 72.
Right.
So you see all sorts of people, and I think that gives you a unique perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I have students who have adult children. I have a student she and her son took acting together. And he's 18 or 20 or 19 or 20. So, yeah, I have students who are really young and students who are, approaching middle age. And I kind of like that, though, because when you have that mix in your class, it's really an interesting dynamic.
Well, because, I guess, in my opinion, at least, and you're the professional here, but I view acting as kind of like a study of human behavior, right? You want to mimic that human behavior the best you can to create that experience. And what a perfect example of the vast array of different humans than a classroom of people that have different backgrounds, different socioeconomic status, different races, different ages from, like we said, 18 to till you're dead, I guess. Go to school till you're dead.
Yeah, right.
And so I imagine that's really nice for you as the instructor to have that, because you really do get a lot of the different perspectives to observe.
Well, and the other interesting thing, especially about acting, not so much about some of the others. Well, the performance class, I suppose, is like this too, but you build a safe place for them to work. And so then it's sort of like they become, and I experienced this when I was an actor myself and in plays, you become kind of like a surrogate family in a way. So that's really interesting too, to see the friendships that develop.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I did an improv class a few years back, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And if money and time and location were not a factor, I would definitely pursue that. I've always been interested in it. A buddy of mine that went to high school with is like, he did that, and now he's got his own show on Netflix and was on SNL. So
cool.
It's always like, I just think improv's amazing. And and I bring that up because I specifically remember that feeling you mentioned of kind of like forming somewhat of like a cohesive family unit, because you have to feel safe around people that you're trying stuff out on, and just you have to feel safe to like act like a complete jackass. And you know, sometimes without any applause or anything, or a laugh or anything. You have to have that crew behind you. So I definitely understand that. I think that's something we all seek to some degree. You know, it's something I'm constantly looking for. I mentioned validation once already. That's always been like the core of, that's why I started to do a lot of things that I do. And I think I'm finally to the point in my life where I'm doing things for me instead of to get that validation from others that I didn't even realize I was doing. But that's where full circle back. That's where all that creative stuff started.
Yes. Well, and once you get to the place where you're doing it for yourself, at least this is how I feel about it now, is I'm just so much more satisfied. And I just want to do it all the time. I don't care if I get paid for it or not. I just want to do it.
Yeah, I definitely don't make like money to live by, or even, I don't know, buy shirts by off of most of the stuff I do. But it's I just enjoy doing it. But at that same thing, I think the big lesson I learned is I have to allow myself to not do it when I don't want to, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like, I didn't pick my guitar up the first 6 months of this year because I didn't really feel like playing guitar. And if it were any other year previously, I would have felt like I was failing at something or letting some imaginary force down. It was like, oh, someone's waiting for you to do this. And instead I was just like, no, I don't feel like that. And that's fine. That's okay. And then when I finally did pick it up, like I had plenty to sing about. So
that's great.
Yeah. I think exercising whatever like creative venue I'm into at that time has been something I've been really exploring over the last couple of years, and it's yielded very positive results, like getting really into writing and allowing myself to be in those vulnerable spaces. Like, I'm in a lot of writing groups and things like that. And that has combined, like, there's some crossover with some sobriety groups that I'm in. So I quit drinking 2.5 years ago. And the thing I found that I wanted to bring up, just segueing into that from this, is listening to your podcast. So you started it during the pandemic. And that is, I feel like, not necessarily a podcast, but definitely some podcasts have started during the pandemic. I think maybe sprung out of boredom and extra time or interests and whatever that looks like. And then, as famous as Taylor Swift put out 2 albums during the pandemic. And people have just unloaded all this creativity during the pandemic. And I find myself in conversations with these people, and especially in sobriety, right? A lot of people realized they were drinking too much when you were left with nothing to do but sit at home.
Oh, yeah.
And well, a lot of I'm in a lot of different sobriety networks and groups, and I'm a big advocate for non-alcoholic beers that like marketing, all this stuff. I won't get into that, but a lot of this stuff sprung up for a lot of people during the pandemic. So I find myself in sobriety groups where it's a little funny because like I got sober before the pandemic, like a year before the pandemic started. And everybody I'm talking to got sober during, and the creativity stuff, like I'm picking up on stuff, the podcast. I started podcast in 2019, and then all these other podcasts came up, and part of me just getting back to the imposter syndrome, that was a big thing where I'd be talking to people that had been doing it much less time than me, whether it was being sober or podcasting or writing, whatever it was. And I'd start to feel less than, not by anything they were saying or doing, but that's just like what was happening in my head. And I'm curious, and I guess I know the answer to this because you already kind of mentioned in the beginning. You already said, Justin, you're better than this than I am, because the microphones and the setup. You said you've only been doing this since July 2020, which as time goes on, you're going to have to accept that was, a year and a half ago. And so you're now better at this than other people are that have started after you. But I wonder, in that world, do you ever feel that? Just turning that around on you. But
I think I did early on when I quit teaching high school in 2008.
Okay.
And I wanted to write. I thought I was going to write a memoir. No. What came to me, though, was a novel that I had thought about for quite some time. And it was kind of sparked by some events with my dad's health. And my dad was my mentor. I love my mom, but my dad was this very wise, understood human nature kind of person, and taught me a lot about that. So when I had this encounter and I could feel that his health was starting to deteriorate, I wanted to write a novel about a daughter and a father. But of course it didn't turn out to be exactly like that. When you start something like that, it goes in its own direction. Yeah. But when I published that in 2017, I did it independently because I just did not want to wait 3 years for some publisher to say, "Oh yes, we're going to publish your." That wasn't me. I wasn't going to do that. And my husband's an artist, a graphic artist. He knew how to lay it out. He could do my cover for me. He could help me edit. So by the time I got that published, I had kind of gotten over that imposter syndrome thing. And then I started my blog in 2013. So I've been writing that for several years. And little by little, through those years from 2008 until now, it's kind of gone away. And I had been thinking about doing a podcast for, I don't know, maybe a year before I started it. Yeah. But the pandemic gave me the chance to do it because I was teaching via Zoom.
Already on here, may as well hit record,
Yeah, right. And I was home all the time. And so I can't remember exactly what I might have gone and looked at some YouTube videos about how to do podcasting and my husband's a real a Mac geek, techie guy, kind of a guy. And so he helped me get it all set up on WordPress. He helped me get it set up on Spotify, Google, and Apple. And now, hopefully, he's going to retire soon. And when he retires, he's going to help me put it up on YouTube, because I do have a YouTube channel where I put the actors, the scenes, but we'll expand my YouTube channel to my podcast. And so
it's just like, I guess I got to this point where imposter, yes, I have felt that through my life, but it was like, this is really useless because I'm me. There's nobody like me. And I have a specific, unique point of view. And actually, I've been told that a lot. You don't think like other people. It's like, oh, really?
That could go either way.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah, it was just a gradual thing to answer. That's the short answer. It was a gradual thing. When I said that to you about, oh, you're more experienced, I just meant you've been doing it longer. You have more equipment. I didn't mean yours is better than mine.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mean that as a slight to you either.
Oh no, I'm just saying. Yeah, I'm just saying. I knew you didn't mean that. I just was saying, yeah, I'm acknowledging the fact that you've been doing it longer.
Yeah. It's a fun thing, and the premise behind your podcast that we're on right now what really reminded me of why I still do mine.
Oh yeah.
Because when I started the podcast Friend Request, I was sitting on the couch. Me and my wife were both just scrolling through social media because that's how couples interact. And but I was scrolling through Facebook, and there's these people that you look at, and this is everybody's friends list or whatever that looks like, that I went to high school with, right? And I haven't talked to him since then. So it's been over 20 years. And there's people I worked with maybe at a restaurant when I was like 20 or 21. You just see these faces, and maybe the face like brings back a memory, or like, oh, remember that crazy time? That's funny. And you hit like add friend, and then they hit accept, and then you just have this list of these people, these strangers, right? They're, because you don't know anything else about them. Like,
right.
There's nobody on that list that I talked to 20 years ago that's the same person I talked to 20 years ago.
Right.
And so I was like, who are these people? And I wanted to find that out. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good idea for a podcast. So
really,
I reached out to people to interview them and just like, tell me about your life. And that's how it started. But it quickly kind of became its own thing, where people's stories had commonalities, right? Like people have struggles and challenges and trauma. And I'm a child of divorce, and I was talking to people that are children of divorce, and you find these similarities, and there's this thread that intertwines and like weaves everybody together. And I found that to be so fascinating. And on the flip side of that, so that's the storytelling. That's where I love listening to people just tell the story of their life. And I've interviewed siblings, which is really fascinating because they have different stories about the same events of their childhood, right? I'm a younger brother, and I know my older brother remembers our childhood very differently than I do. And furthermore, my mother remembers it even differently, and which is fascinating. But I found I was asking these questions that were kind of coming to my mind, and as they told their story, I'd be like, oh, like, you mentioned blah, blah, blah from your past. Like, do you think that affects what you just told me about how you're doing this today? And some of it was carryover from like my own therapy sessions. And then some of it was carryover from books I was reading. But it was just kind of an instinct that I had with how I was tying some of this stuff together. And I realized that was like, that's the thing that therapists have. And I was doing these little, almost like miniature therapy sessions with these people. And it was the first time I was doing something that I was very passionate about, that I could also like turn into a career. Because playing music, like, and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, there's professional musicians out there, but there's also about, 1 billion that are not.
Yes.
And I've gone down that road. But so this felt like the first real thing. So it's a very strange thing to finally be like going to school for something I'm passionate about at 38 years old. But I'm very, that's both why I do the podcast and what finally helped me make a decision on a career. Cause I've always just had jobs that I fell into, and I'm motivated. Like I always advance in any career that I'm in, but
Yeah.
I've never really been passionate about anything that I do
Yeah.
as far as work goes. And now I have something that I can be. So it's very exciting.
That's so cool. Because that's kind of how it all evolved for me too. Was I would have these, you probably have heard this story that I've told it on my podcast before. I would have these conversations with my father. Well, our whole family would. When I was young, quite a bit younger, we'd watch like some Disney movie or something. And my dad would say, "So what did you think of the movie?" "Oh, I really liked it." "Oh, well, what did you like about it?" It was the Socratic method. He kept asking question after question. After he didn't know that was the Socratic method, though, because he didn't even finish high school because he had dyslexia. But he would keep asking these questions until finally we would get to, well, what do you think the story meant?
Yeah.
And over the years, especially when I was a junior and senior in high school, it would kind of just come down to my dad and me. Sometimes I'd come home from a game and I'd go watch a really late movie, and he'd get up and come out and watch the movie with me. And then we'd talk about it all weekend. Or sometimes on the extra channel, the independent channel would have like 5:00 on Sunday afternoon, they'd have a movie. And so after Dad and my brother were done watching their football game or basketball game or whatever, I'd watch this movie. And sometimes Dad would watch it with me because that was his thing. He would do the thing that my brother liked with my brother, and he would do the thing that I liked with me. And then there was a lot of years between my two younger sisters, my brother and my two younger sisters. So when they got older, he would do the thing with them that they liked,
Yeah.
But so that led me to theater eventually. Religious studies was the first degree, but it was all about the stories again, the ancient stories and theater. And then my master's in theater. And then, that whole time I was kind of teaching. Eventually I got my degree in teaching, and then I was teaching high school and now college. But I'm kind of done with the teaching part of it, and I love the interaction with the students, but all the paperwork junk. Ugh. So when I found the podcasting, even though I enjoyed writing my novel and I enjoy doing the blog, every aspect of the podcast was the thing that I just loved.
Yeah.
Even the recording and the editing and the getting it all ready and scheduling it on my website. So that's what I want to do I will continue to do the blog and write. I understand that finally finding your passion. Yeah. But see, I think and for me, and maybe it's not this way for everyone, every little step led to the podcast, every little step along the way.
Yeah, I agree and disagree. There's part of me, I'm not a very spiritual person. So a part of me is like, no, it didn't happen that way. But then the other part of me finds signs like that I just I want to stick with, right? Like the narrative's there if you want to see it. I used to say that, and I say used to not because I don't really believe it anymore. It just hasn't come up recently. But where everything that's happened to my fingers has been so I can play guitar better. Really random stuff. Like one of my fingernails grows like 2 millimeters shorter than it used to because when I was 16, it got closed in a trunk on accident, and it just like is noticeably a little shorter than the one next to it, and it always has grown that way since then. But I think because of that, I can put it like next to a fret on the guitar the way. And my hands are gigantic, so I don't think I could do that if my fingernail was just a little bit longer on that finger. And just little stuff like that, like where I've gotten cuts and stuff. I'm a clumsy person. I'm constantly injuring myself. But so I'll be, like, oh, that's calloused over the way it is because, I'll tie it all together to that.
Yes.
And it's silly, but it's also like, maybe it's true. I
Well,
I
yeah.
refuse to be definitive on it, but I won't
Mm-hmm.
dismiss it either. And I
Well,
feel like, yeah, that's true of the podcast as well.
yeah. I mean, you don't have to seek connections if you don't want to.
Yeah. Well, and it's really, this is just the critical brain, right? This is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly battling left and right brain. Like I love
Mm-hmm.
math. I'm great at math, numbers, 110%.
Mm-hmm.
I also love everything creative. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like
Mm-hmm.
a constant battle, which explains what I just was talking about. But that's like
Yes.
writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I I lived in Los Angeles for 2 years in my
Mm-hmm.
20s, and it was a very impactful time. And I've wanted to write a memoir about it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't never even get started. And my friend I worked with years ago, again, random people, told me I should interview her sister on my podcast. And I was like, well, I don't know your sister. Kind of like defeats the purpose. At this point, I interview people I don't know somewhat regularly, but at the time, I wasn't 100% on board. But she's like, oh, she's just wrote a memoir. It's coming out. Like, I think you guys will like really get along. And so I did. I interviewed her, and she has this amazing memoir about her time in Senegal and how she ended up building that into a business with someone she met there, where they sell Senegalese goods here. And anyway, and I just hit it off with her. Like, we're really good friends now, and she was very into and is very into like writing practice and Natalie Goldberg and just everything writing.
Mm-hmm.
She moved out to California with her husband and just took that first year to just write. Like, her husband worked and she just wrote constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so she kind of brought me along with her, and I ended up writing the first half of my memoir, like 40 some thousand words in like 10 days. And then I stopped. I haven't gone back to it since. But it felt good to get it out on paper, and doing that, I was able to dive more into like what I was trying to say. And she's able to ask me questions like, I think one of the most important questions for anyone that is struggling writing anything, which is, who's your audience? And that question, like, by itself blew my mind. But then she asked, is it just you? Are you the audience? And I was like, is that an option? She's like, yeah. Because if I'm just writing with myself as the audience, I can all of a sudden I take away a lot of censorship. I take away a lot of pressure. I take like, and it's just like, oh, I'm just writing this for me. And at the end, that can change. But during the process, if the audience is just me, oh my God, how easy is that? The only person to disappoint is yourself, and you're probably disappointing yourself anyway, Justin. So it's perfect. And so stuff like that's just worked out. There's definitely, if I want to find connections, there's a billion ways to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And there's also, just coincidence.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Well, yeah, I completely understand that aspect of it, that you meet someone that spurs you on into a new direction or a new way of thinking or something. Because originally my podcast was all just going to be about the stories that people read and watch and why they love them. And then someone at the college, and mostly it was my former students and colleagues at the college and that kind of thing. And someone at the college suggested that I talk to these two women who had started the Douglas Oral History Project. And I had taught with one of them at the college, and I think I also taught with her at one of the high schools. And so the third woman who started it with them couldn't meet with us, but I had this wonderful conversation with them about they just have ordinary everyday people from Douglas, Arizona come in on a Wednesday and just talk about their lives. And most of the time the people say, well, I'm not very interesting. My life's not very interesting.
Every time.
Every time they say that. And then it's so fascinating to hear what they have to share. So because Douglas was one of the places that when Pancho Villa was having his war, he was kind of going through Douglas and, so Douglas isn't that old of a city in terms of Arizona, but it's, I mean, it has the first international airport in the United States. I mean, there are all these really interesting little tidbits. Thornton Wilder lived there for like 9 months and wrote, I mean, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So after I talked with him, I said, oh my gosh, every single life is a library. And that's what my podcast needs to be about.
Yeah. If I could somehow get paid every time someone said that they had nothing interesting to say, I would be a millionaire. Yeah, that is the most common response. It's one of the most common reasons people don't want to do the podcast because I don't have anything interesting. And I have yet to talk to someone that doesn't have something interesting to say. They all think they don't, but they are all very wrong. And it drives me crazy. And it's funny you mentioned the oral histories. I'm working on a project right now at Oakland University here in Michigan, where in the 70s, a faculty member at Oakland University went to Pontiac, Michigan, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. I mean, it's the namesake of the Pontiac brand of automobiles. And and then it's also home to many other things. The Detroit Lions played there for many years. The Detroit Pistons were right down the road from there, and then countless other things. There's a huge history there. And it was Detroit, Flint, and Pontiac were the three automobile hubs for all manufacturing of all automobiles. And in the 70s, an Oakland University faculty member went to Pontiac and recorded a bunch of oral histories on a cassette recorder. And they found them at Oakland and recently started digitizing them. And I'm working on this project where we're taking some of those interviews from the 70s and then interviewing people now and talking about how the city has changed. And it's just really fascinating. We don't feel like we don't, and I'm guilty of this, take time to think about, not to sound dramatic, but to think about the ground we stand on and all the things that have happened there and all the people that are still around today that know a story or know somebody or were directly affected or connected to those things that have happened over the last century, 2 centuries, millennia, depending on what part of the world you're in. And it's really fascinating to be able to dive into that directly, even though it's covering 60 years, but still it's really cool. I bet that Douglas project is gonna, can you imagine looking back at that in 100 years?
Yes. Well, and the county that I live in is as big as some states could fit in our county. That's how big it is. But it had Coronado went through here. So we can see the Coronado National Monument from our house. Nice. The Chiricahua Mountains where Cochise and Geronimo hid out from the army is here. Tombstones here. I mean, there are all these things here. And so when we moved here, even though Arizona politically has some kind of weird things, because we moved from Portland, Oregon. Okay, so Portland, Oregon's very liberal. And we
moved
liberal
as you can get.
And we moved here and it was like, okay, this is kind of weird energy. Fort Huachuca is also in Sierra Vista, and it's the intelligence center for the military. So all these Buffalo Soldiers, that's where the Buffalo Soldiers were. So all this history, and I felt the energy of all of that layered underneath some of all this other stuff going on that was kind of weird. So, every single place you go, because I mean, I lived in Portland, Oregon at the end of the Oregon Trail and am the descendant of people who went on the Oregon Trail, who went west on the Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you go, because my husband and I took a trip circumnavigating the globe, and there's all this history everywhere. And all the experiences of all the people from generation to generation to generation that shapes invisibly sometimes how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah, that's I have a strong draw to go to England. And that's like, obviously, if you can see a picture of me, that's my ancestral hub there. But that I've always wanted to go there, and part of it is what you said, where that the history involved there, and the fact that I can go and see grave sites of ancestors that died on that land before America was even a thing, and you can walk down streets where every building is older than this country is.
Oh yeah,
and things like that fascinate me and really put things in a perspective that I wish more people could have.
I mean, well, yeah. I mean, Stonehenge is one of the oldest monuments on the planet.
Yeah.
And yeah, we didn't go to Egypt, but we did go to Greece and Olympia. I mean, all of the ruins. It's like, wow, people really actually went into that temple. Went into whatever it was. But there are those kinds of, and in that we have them in our area too. The first peoples who lived on this continent. There are lots of those kind of monuments around here too.
Yeah, out there definitely more than here in Michigan.
Yeah.
So they did just uncover a land bridge between Canada and Michigan that's now like far under Lake Huron. But they found evidences of like ancient hunting blinds on this land bridge that's now, it's like 150 feet below the surface now. But it's just remarkable. Stuff like that's just crazy.
Well, yeah, and we just saw a story yesterday on CBS Sunday Morning about these trees in California in the White Mountains that are the oldest trees on the planet. Some of them are like 48,000 years old. I mean, they're older than the pyramids.
Wow. How big are those trees?
Well, and they're gnarly looking. I mean, they're not really, they're some sort of a like a pine tree. They have all these twisted branches, and they're not really super tall either. They're not like the sequoias, which are also ancient. But they've been doing these, taking little samples from the tree and counting the rings and looking how old they are. And oh my goodness, they're so old. And it's like, I wish we could hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I get excited every time there's if you can scroll past all the other headlines and find some new like science related discovery. Like what is the ruin? Because you mentioned Stonehenge, and I was thinking of, I think it's in Turkey. I can never pronounce it right, and I'll butcher it. It's like Gigio-Pepa or something. I can't.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? It's now. I almost want to look it up now. But it's one of the oldest, I think it's the oldest evidence of humans using tools or.
No, I think I know what you're talking about, but I do not remember the name.
Like it's relatively new as far as discoveries go. It was just on an episode of Cities of the Underworld on History Channel. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to I just interviewed the host of Cities of the Underworld, and the perspective you can have when you spend your life, career and and just leisurely traveling the entire world and seeing different civilizations and poor, rich, all different kinds of food and socioeconomic statuses and what people value, in different areas of the world. Sometimes it's money, like welcome to America. And sometimes it's family more than that. And sometimes, there's so much out, and I'm talking out of my ass because I haven't left the country, but I'm fascinated by all of that's out there, and I'm constantly trying to like gain perspective, and then I get hopeful that other people will also do that.
Yeah. Well, you have traveled outside the country if you count the things that you watch.
Yeah, but it's all edited.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting to be in different countries and feel the different, because I'm a highly sensitive person. So, India feels very different than Australia. Greece feels very different than France. The energies are just very different depending on where you go. So yeah, we did go to England too, and we just saw something, and I think it was on PBS about Stonehenge, and it's this guy who's been studying Stonehenge for like 20 years or 25 years or something, and they finally figured out where the smaller blue stones came from in Wales. And it was, they also found like a henge in Wales that maybe they took those stones out of and moved them to
like a smaller one,
a bigger henge.
A bigger one.
Okay. Yeah. If I remember correctly, it was bigger, but it was like, well, they had to, for some reason, the civilization had to move. And so they took the stones with them, and they figured out how they moved them. And I mean, because we've seen this guy 2 or 3 different shows about Stonehenge and the wood henge that's nearby, and trying to figure out what the purposes of the henges were, and the standing stones too, because Avebury Circle, the town of Avebury is built right in the middle of Avebury Circle, and there are all these standing stones, in the town and outside the town too. And when you stand there and touch the stones,
that's what I want to do. I want to walk around England, and not like London, but the countryside, and touch fences and stones.
Yeah. Well, you can't touch Stonehenge, but the other things you can. Look, Avebury Circle, you can touch they don't let you do that in Greece. They don't let you touch the stones, which I was very sad about. But
I found the name of that place.
Oh, what is it?
Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, right. Okay, I'm going to say something really weird here. Yeah. I saw about Göbekli Tepe.
Yes, it's not easy to say.
On Ancient Aliens.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
Well, this weird thing was happening right for like a year before we got rid of Dish. Every single Friday that they were playing a new Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, we would turn on the television, and no matter what channel we left it on the night before, it would be on Ancient Aliens. It was just the weirdest thing. It was like, wait a minute, we left it on Turner Classic Movies.
Tell you something, listen.
Yeah, that's what we said. So that ancient place, yes.
Yeah, because I guess they dated it to 9500 BC.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it's, the evidence, I mean, there's carvings, there's writings and drawings, and it's like the earliest known use of most of that.
Yeah, and they don't know how some of those stones were carved and stuff like that, as I recall.
Because it predated what we would consider the modern age.
Right.
Crazy stuff. No, well, but it just fascinates me. I mean, that's I think maybe some of the underlying like root causes of why I'm fascinated by listening to people's stories. And someday the things we're doing today could be an origin for what other people are studying,
Right.
And it's crazy to think about.
It is.
How you're impacting what will be history in the future.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, so do you have any books that you have published?
So, no. The short answer to that is no. I was a ghostwriter on a number of novellas, and so there's things I've written that are published, but my name is nowhere on them.
Yeah.
But that's okay. It's nothing I would send to my family as examples of good.
Well, it's good practice writing, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, and that's the funny thing. Like, I got paid for it, so like from that perspective, I'm like, yes, I'm a writer. I've written stuff and been paid for it, and it was published. But the stuff that I really want to write, I don't know. One day, I think I'll just release a book of a bunch of unfinished short stories.
That's great.
Create your own adventure at the end.
That's right. Yeah. But do you write music as well?
Yeah, so I have four albums.
Oh, wow.
I think 4.
And where can we access those?
The good ones are everywhere. So like in my last studio album was 2013. It's called Songs from Within, and that I actually funded that through Kickstarter. I raised like $6,000 and went to the studio and recorded all those songs. And I mean, I love how it sounds because, you know, I play guitar and sing, and that's most of my stuff is just that. And so getting together with friends that are also musicians to do the lead guitar and the bass and the drums and hear these things that were fully formed in my head but never got past the acoustic guitar, to hear them come to life. Like, I still enjoy listening to that, and that's available everywhere, you know, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, wherever.
Cool.
And I don't know where you could find the older stuff, but I am putting together an album right now of a lot of one-off stuff. Essentially, the last 2.5 years, I've written a lot of just like single songs. I started a concept album on horror movies. So there's 3 songs that are one about Scream, one about Friday the 13th, and one about Nightmare on Elm Street. And that's as far as I got. So I was like, I'll just package those as just the 3 songs. And I have a friend that I actually interviewed that he talked about releasing music, and he said, just do it. Like, don't wait for like, oh, I'm going to put this whole thing together in this album. He's like, just if you got a song and you do the whole thing and you produce it and you know it's done, don't wait for the other 9. Just especially in today's like digital age, any artist that's not, you know, a mainstream signed to a record label artist is releasing just singles. So I decided I will take all of those one-off songs that I've been working on over the last couple of years and put them out kind of as a collection. And so that'll be coming, date to be decided, early next year. I think it's just really just a lot of editing and mixing and stuff. But so I've been doing that. I've been doing that longer than anything. I've been writing songs almost as far back as I can remember. In elementary school, I was listening to a lot of Weird Al and writing song parodies, and middle school is when I started writing songs for girls, and then I think it's all downhill from there. And you know, in one way or another, I think every song's probably about a girl. So I've been doing that for 25 years. So
that's cool. I'm not a poet, so I would never be able to.
See, I struggle with actual poetry in the way that, like, you know, as a songwriter, I've been rhyming things as creatively as possible, but still, when I hear a really good poet, especially like a modern poet that has really good rhythm to their words, and then there's just no rhyming, I'm like, oh my God, how do you do that? Like, isn't that just called a paragraph? That's so intimidating. So I as much as I wouldn't think twice about calling a lot of lyrics poetry, I don't know if I'd lump myself into that. There's one song that comes to mind just because the like amount of metaphors I use in it. But other than that, I don't know. I don't know if I would call it poetry on my end, but that's just that full circle back to the beginning. That's that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I don't know why, but I think we do that. We all, almost everybody grows up not loving themselves or thinking that they're not worth very much. And it's sort of like this epidemic that humanity has had. This is my theory. Okay. Through the centuries, millennia. And I don't know where it started but I'm hoping we're coming out of that now.
Yeah. I get jealous of people that are super confident because they're super naive or a little ignorant. And I'll talk to some of them. And I just recently, the episode that just got released today, I talked to her about, she said when she was like 22, straight out of college, in Michigan, she got offered a job in San Francisco. And her first response was, I need more money than that. I was like, where do you get the wherewithal to have the confidence and assertiveness as a woman at 22 in the Midwest to tell some San Francisco company, no, pay me more money?
Yeah.
Like that blows my mind.
Well, actually, she probably would need more money because, man, San Francisco is a really expensive city.
Yeah. How they still live there now. This was 20 years ago now.
Well, I mean, some people, have lived there so long that they own their house or they own their apartment or whatever. But yeah, I can't imagine living in New York either because it's so expensive. And LA is expensive. Everywhere is expensive. I mean, my sister and her family moved back to Renton about 5 years ago and took my mom with them. They were living in Denver where my brother lives, but it wasn't a good place for them. So they moved back because they grew up, my younger sisters grew up in Bremerton. They rented this kind of not very nice house, and it's almost $3,000 a month.
It's like twice my mortgage.
It's 3 times my mortgage.
That's a salary, $36,000 a year. That's more than I was making when I was 20 years old.
Yeah, I know. Ridiculous. Well, the house that they moved into is owned by a corporation.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Welcome to America.
Yeah. Right. But now they have a contract for a townhouse.
It's another story where someone might say, I don't have anything interesting to say.
Yeah. Well, they do. They do say, we have something interesting to say. Because my sister's also a life coach. Eventually she'll be able to do that and help people, hey, we go through stuff. You go through stuff, and partly it's the story we tell on ourselves in our head, whether or not we come through, but it's also, am I willing to learn something from this or not? Yeah.
That's the trick.
Yeah. Am I willing to learn something, or do I just want to wallow and complain?
Yeah.
Because some people get, they like that. They like to complain.
Yeah. It's comfortable down there sometimes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's right. Well, I mean, you can do it for a while. I did it for a while, and then I got really bored with it. It was like,
yeah, you got to come out eventually.
Yeah.
Go outside, take a walk, rent a kayak.
Well, I've been keeping a journal since I was 24, and I started it because I was going through I didn't start college until I was 22. So when I declared religious studies as my major, I was at this small Christian college. I was the only woman in the program, and all these Bible thumper guys kept coming up to me during lunch and dinner and, you need to change your major. It says here in the Bible, blah, 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 blah. And, I'm like, oh gosh, finally they got it that I wasn't going to change my mind. But I was really angry about that. I had stuffed it. And one of my instructors said, go buy a journal and start writing. And so for months and months, I was just complaining and about these guys. And finally, one day I said, I'm really tired of this. And I wrote it in my journal. What am I supposed to be learning from this? And I got answers right away. I was like, oh, okay. So that sent me off on this whole new thing about journaling, that
journaling's amazing.
You can figure stuff out in your journal. Yeah.
And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but no, I didn't. I guess I mentioned Natalie Goldberg, but The Artist Way?
Yes.
Yeah. And doing the morning pages.
Yeah. Julia Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten a lot out of morning pages as a journaling technique because like you mentioned, the complaining you were doing for months and stuff is you kind of get out all of that usually around the first 2 pages, and then you start really getting some meat into the notebook.
Yeah. That's right.
It's funny how it's just like a release,
Mm-hmm. Well, I just listened to somebody, Allison's her first name. And she's a writer, and she was on What Should I Read Next? That's the one podcast I listen to every single week. And she was talking about, she actually did research on this because she helps writers. And she has a website where she encourages people to write, even if it's just a journal. And she said, I finally did research on this because I suspected that writing was a way to not only express yourself, but help you figure out things. And, it's a vital part of being a human being. And so she did research on it. And yeah, she was right that writing is a way to even if you never show it to anyone, it's an important part of being a human being.
Yeah.
So all those people that write and never show it to anyone, they're writers too.
Well, then I qualify.
Yeah.
Good.
For years and years, that's what I was. I just wrote in my journal. That was it.
It's good. It's good to get it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have anything else you want to say before we say goodbye?
I don't think so. I feel like we covered a lot of different topics, and I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, me too.
I wish I had something interesting to say.
Now, see, there you go.
Yeah, just kidding. I find myself too interesting.
I think everyone's interesting. I'm curious. I'm with Ted Lasso. I want to be curious, not judgmental.
It's a good stance to be.
Uh-huh.
We could have a little more of that right now. That would be helpful.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun talking to you.
I did too. I had fun too. I always have fun every time.
Because storytelling is the oldest thing that humans have always done.
That's right. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you take care.
You too, Lucinda. It was really great meeting you, and I look forward to the release of this in April.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. April or maybe May. Who knows?
Well, enjoy your vacation.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles, at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.